Blair Fix. I'm chairing this session. This is T11 if you're just joining us. So first off, we are going to hear from Nathaniel Umukoro from Edo University in Nigeria. He's going to be talking about managing violent conflicts in Africa. And so, Nathaniel, take it away.
The title of my presentation is Managing Violent Conflicts in Africa, Insights from the Principles of Thermodynamics. Africa has witnessed different forms of violent conflicts such as civil wars, interstate wars, and terrorist attacks. One of the major consequences of violent conflicts that requires proper management is the movement of people from areas experiencing violent conflicts to places that are relatively peaceful, either as internally displaced persons or refugees. This paper examines how some of the principles of thermodynamics can be used to explain the nature of such movements and how to manage several problems associated with it. Some of the principles of thermodynamics used in this paper include energy, temperature, heat transfer, thermal equilibrium, exothermic reaction, and entropy. Now let's consider thermodynamics, conflict, and migration. How are they related? Thermodynamics, which is the study of energy relationships involving heat, mechanical work, and energy transformations, is useful in understanding migration either as refugees or internally displaced persons during violent conflicts. Energy has been defined as a power to do work or the capacity of a material body or radiation to do work. Thus, the power or capacity of conflict to do work can be described as conflict energy. The work conflict does can either be positive or negative depending on how the conflict situation is handled. Just as the energy possessed by a material body can exist in a potential state before it is set in motion, that is, becomes kinetic with the application of force, conflict energy in its potential state can be set in motion by conflict accelerating factors. If conflict accelerating factors are not controlled, conflict explosion could be the result, especially after the occurrence of a triggering event. The notion that conflict can be in a potential state is buttressed by Brown, 1981, who espoused the view that the first level of conflict situation is the latent or potential conflict, where two or more people held conflicting views but are not aware of how the other feel. In the view of Adekoya in 1999, potential conflict or structural background condition of conflict requires the effects of conflict accelerating factors before violent conflict can occur. Conflict accelerating factors can be compared to thermodynamics concepts such as heat or temperature. The notion that temperature can be compared to conflict accelerating factor can be better explained when we understand the meaning of temperature. Temperature is the scientific quantity which corresponds to the primary sensations of hotness and coldness. The conflict temperature of a society or country can be described as a measure of the quantity of conflict accelerating factors acting on the potential source of conflict or structural background conditions of conflict. Conflict accelerating factors include rising cases of unemployment, poverty, and threats to physical, environmental, and human security. If the conflict temperature of a country, that is, conflict accelerating factors, continues to increase without effective control measures put in place, conflict explosion might result, just as an automobile experiencing overheat could break down. The principle of exothermic reaction can be used to explain the link between conflict explosion and migration. Migration in this context could be movement of people as entirely displaced persons or as refugees. Exothermic reaction is one in which heat is liberated or given out to the surroundings. If a society or country is experiencing violent conflict, it is likely to make people with various physical, social, and economic problems to move out of the conflict zone to other societies or countries that are relatively peaceful. As people continue to move from the violent ridden area or country to relatively peaceful countries, conflict-accelerating factors such as rising cases of unemployment, poverty, and environmental and other forms of human insecurity could increase. An increase in the conflict temperature of the country can be said to be experienced. If such movement continues and effective strategies are not adopted and implemented, violent conflict might also explode in the host territory or country. Therefore, the influx of people from a violent conflict-ridden country to a relatively peaceful country or territory is a danger signal indicating conflict explosion in the relatively peaceful country. Now let's take some examples from the African situation. Here I'm going to use the case of the Boko Haram crisis in Nigeria. The terrorist activities of Boko Haram have increased the insecurity problem in Nigeria and neighboring countries. The activities of the Boko Haram group have affected Nigerians and foreigners in different ways. For example, the adoption of over 200 female students in a government secondary school in the town of Chibok in Borno State, Nigeria, on the night of April 11 and 15, 2014, has been a cause for concern to both Nigerians and international community. After that adoption, several others have also occurred in the northern part of Nigeria. Now, the terrorist activities has made people to move from the northeastern part of Nigeria to other areas of Nigeria and other neighboring countries in Africa. Now, movement across borders has become a major issue in the escalation of the Boko Haram crisis. Now, the principle of heat transfer can be used to explain why people move across borders as a result of the Boko Haram crisis. Just as heat transfer takes place solely because of temperature difference, people move out of parts of northern Nigeria to countries such as Chad, Cameroon, and Niger because of differences in the level of threats to human existence in these areas. Victims of Boko Haram attacks in northern Nigeria usually migrate to other countries or to other territories in Nigeria because they perceive the security situation in these territories to be safer. In other words, the conflict temperature in northern Nigeria is likely viewed by the victims of Boko Haram attacks to be higher than neighboring African countries and other territories in Nigeria where they normally flee to. So just as many thermodynamic processes proceed naturally in one direction but not the opposite, that is, heat always flows from a hot body to a cooler body and never the reverse. Cross-border migration in areas affected by the Boko Haram crisis, especially with reference to victims, is usually from Boko Haram devastated areas to places where there is relative peace, and not from areas experiencing relative peace to Boko Haram devastated areas. The principle of exothermic reaction and thermal equilibrium can be used to explain the likely consequence of such movement across borders to countries such as Chad, Niger, and Cameroon, or to other parts of Nigeria. Exothermic reaction is one in which heat is liberated or given out to the surroundings. Terrorist activities in northern Nigeria produce refugees and conflict-accelerating factors which are absorbed by other African territories and other areas in Nigeria. The principle of thermal equilibrium helps to explain the danger associated with the prevailing situation. Thermal equilibrium refers to a state of balance, the absence of change when two bodies are in thermal contact and there is no net flow of heat between them. In other words, two physical systems are in thermal equilibrium if no heat flows between them when they are connected by a path permeable to heat. If the current state of Boko Haram activities persists and movement across borders continues to other African countries, there is a likelihood that serious security challenges will erupt in these countries, which will prevent other Boko Haram which may prevent other Boko Haram attacks from seeking refuge in those countries. In other words, the level of security challenge in countries such as Chad, Niger, and Cameroon may become like that of northern Nigeria if effective measures are not put in place. So it is important here to note that there are a number of statistical evidence that shows that the movement of people from northern Nigeria to other parts of Africa like Chad, Cameroon has really created security challenges in those countries they move to. So based on the zeroth law of thermodynamics, which states that if two systems A and B are in thermal equilibrium with a third system, C, then A and B are in thermal equilibrium with each other if the level of security challenge in northern Nigeria becomes the same with that of Niger, Chad, and Cameroon and other neighboring countries, then the management of refugee problems might become very complex. The following are some statistical evidence pointing toward this direction. In 2007, Cameroon hosted a total population of 2,900 refugees from Nigeria. In 2014, Cameroon had an estimated number of 44,000 refugees from Nigeria, and this figure has also increased over time. And internal Cameroonian refugees also began to leave areas bordering Nigeria to escape Boko Haram violence, especially following December 2014 Cameroon clashes. So this indicates what we learned from thermodynamic principle, that the movement of Nigerian refugees who fled because of Boko Haram to neighboring Cameroonian border territories are now experiencing the same kind of challenge that existed in the place of origin of those refugees. For example, more than 100 suspected Nigerian Boko Haram militants were killed and over 200 arrested during an operation conducted by the Cameroonian army in December 2014, far north region of Cameroon. The Boko Haram attacks in Cameroon has made the Cameroonian government to strengthen the military might of the country and sending more troops to the north to fight against Boko Haram fighters. Progress towards thermal equilibrium and conflict explosion in such areas have been observed in Nigeria's neighboring countries such as Cameroon, as earlier mentioned. So it is therefore important that policies should be targeted at curbing the source of such conflicts and trying to also reduce the extent in which refugees or IDPs move away from areas where there are violent conflicts. Now let us apply the entropy principle to the situation in Nigeria and neighboring countries. In other words, what could result from persistent violent conflicts such as Boko Haram terrorist activities and cross-border migration in Africa? The entropy principle can help answer this question. Entropy is a thermodynamic concept and has become part of the system's language. It indicates the degree of system disorganization. Entropy can be conceptualized as a progressive loss of the relationships that integrate a system. Some studies suggest that cross-border migration as a result of violent conflict or terrorism can lead to the disorganization of the host country. Existing literature suggests that this can happen in two ways. The first is when a refugee influx alters the balance of power in the host state by changing the country's ethnic composition, for example, or affecting access to resources. This process of diffusion, as termed by Lake and Rothschild, 1998, can generate violence in the host country. If the process is left unchecked, the conflict can eventually engulf the entire region. And that's why Fearon 1998 envisions a possible chain reaction in which ethnic war causes refugees who destabilize a new place, causing more war and causing more refugees, and so on. It is important to know that even though there are many other insights from the principle of thermodynamics that we can use to explain African conflict situations, time constraint will not allow me to present all. But it's good to know that strengthening the existing institutions and leadership could contribute toward the management of the crisis in Africa. Reducing poverty and other conflict-accelerating factors could also be helpful in reducing the conflict temperature in African countries, and this will relatively help to ensure peace in the continent. Thank you for listening.
Nathaniel, is your camera working?
Your microphone is muted. Okay.
Okay, yeah, I can hear you now. My camera is not really working well.
Okay, one question I had for you. What gave you the inspiration for applying thermodynamics to conflict diagnosis? Where did you get the idea from?
Yeah, my inspiration came when I was doing my first master's degree at the University of Ibadan. My master's thesis was on thermodynamics. I applied it to conflict diagnosis in Nigeria's Niger Delta. So since then, I've always wanted to work harder into applying other principles in understanding African conflicts. So the inspiration came from my supervisor when I was in the University of Ibadan for my master's program.
He suggested it to you.
Pardon?
Your thesis supervisor was the one that suggested to use thermodynamics.
Not really. I suggested to him, and he said it's a good idea that I should try and see what can come out of it. So it was my personal inspiration to look into it and see something new, with regard to conflict studies.
So what gave you the idea that thermodynamics applied to society?
Yes, I read it. I read about thermodynamics, and I just thought, I just did my critical thinking and decided to try it.
Okay, that sounds good.
I just like that. I liked there's a lot of talks here that are very theoretical, and this has a very important social context. And I'd like to just say to Nathaniel, I would thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, Nathaniel, I find very interesting how you relate the concept of entropy to a disorganizing phenomenon. And I wonder if you could say just a little more about that disorganizing process, and if you can, about any alternative to that. Is there anything that can be conceived negentropically about improvements, however small those improvements might be?
Okay, thank you. So talking about disorganization or entropy with regard to conflict studies, we can take a good example from, let's say, two countries experiencing violent conflict. If, let's say, Nigeria experiencing Boko Haram crisis, then we have Cameroon, a neighboring country. Now, by the time refugees or people who are displaced crosses borders and move to another country that is relatively peaceful, if that particular country fails to put strategies in place to manage the influx of refugees effectively, it will increase what we call conflict accelerating factors. For example, if they fail to provide adequate employment for the refugees or provide them with food or other supplies, there's the likelihood that there's going to be breakdown of law and order in that host country. So the only way to prevent disorganization in the host country, for example, is to ensure that the influx of refugees are regulated, and they also provide the necessary things that can keep them going so as to prevent the outbreak of violent conflict. And we can always see that from countries that we had so many refugees and nothing was provided for the refugees. They've really created tensions and conflicts in their host countries.
Okay, on that front, I think we should move on. It's 3:35. Thank you, Nathaniel. It was a very
All right,
interesting talk.